Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Phoenix Growth Podcast. Today, I am joined by Adam Coury, the host of Backpack Theory podcast and the founder of Solving Why, his coaching business, helping men to find their why in life and find more purpose in their life. So, first of all, Adam, I want to welcome you to the show, I guess, first of all. So, good to have you on, man. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Yeah, it's good to see you. Yeah, I want to talk to you about your own personal transformation. That's what this podcast is all about, right? Like it's about the phoenix and going through this cycle of death and rebirth in a sense, like leaving behind your old self and becoming someone who's transformed, different from before. So why don't you run me through your story, like how you've got to where you are today and the ups and downs during that time?
Okay. Yeah, so first, thank you for having me on the podcast. I really appreciate it. Few technical difficulties starting off with on my end, which is always a part of whenever you start something, for goodness sake. And
Sure.
you know, it's crazy. Like, not just I started my podcast back in 2022. And I can't tell you, like, through the series of starting a podcast, how many difficulties I ran into because the preparation, the journey you go through just makes you better and better over time. And it's really applicable to life. And in my personal life, man, growing up, I think my biggest thing is I always wanted to live this polished life to where everybody accepted me. I was always people pleasing. I was always out there trying to make everything perfect, just like we can fall into whenever it comes to podcasting or anything else in your life.
Mm.
And this narrative that I had growing up was a religious based narrative, which basically from a very young age, I had this concept in my mind that if I was not perfect, then God would not accept me. And so my
Mm.
entire life through my teenage years to my 20s to my early 30s, I always projected this image of perfection. My dad made me start working whenever I was 12 years old. My first job was fencing in 20 acres so that I could make money to buy sneakers to go to a basketball camp. And so I've always had an entrepreneurial, mindset and an entrepreneurial spirit about me because that was just instilled in me in a very young age. However, even through all of that and having to work hard, I still always, whenever it came to hanging out with friends, whenever it came to associating with my parents, I always tried to make the story sound a little bit better because I always wanted to present this image of that I had it all together, that everything was perfect, that there were no issues in anything that I had going on. And I really carried that into my 20s, my 30s. In my 20s, I ran nightclubs for quite a few years. And whenever I ran the nightclubs, whenever I would run into people, I always told them that I owned the nightclub. And then whenever I transitioned out of that into a service company that I grew for about 8 years, creating all of the processes, creating all of the HR manuals, doing all the budgeting, the projections. And people would talk to me, and I would also tell them that I owned the company, or always make it sound like I made a little bit more, or always made it sound like it was just a little bit better than it was. And it wasn't until 2022, whenever I'd gone through, I had a marriage, I had a lot of success in consulting, that I really hit rock bottom and realized one day that my entire life, basically, I had been living out a farce. I had been living out a projection, an image of not who I really was, but who I wanted everybody to think I would be so that I would be accepted. And I think for men, that's something we really struggle with and we really run into. And so,
Mm.
actually, the start of this year, I took all of that baggage, all of that hardship, all the things that I had experienced, and I turned that into what now I get to wake up and do every single day, which is I get to inspire hope in others by sharing stories of seemingly insurmountable circumstances in my own life to allow God's light to shine through all of my imperfections, to let anybody know that regardless of where they're at, there's always hope. And that's really what I am. I'm the hope dealer. Like I go out, I work with men, I work with organizations, and I work with individuals to just let them know that it doesn't matter where you're at. It doesn't matter what you have right now. Like if you can look inwards and you can find that little 5-year-old self that has always been chasing affirmation, always been chasing the need for other people to feel like you're important. If you can just find that inner voice inside of yourself and really start concentrating on how do I overcome those false narratives in my life? That's really where your journey can begin, and that can happen at any point in your life.
Mm, okay, cool. Yeah, man. Thanks for sharing that with me. Yeah,
Yeah.
and really inspiring what you're doing, I think. Yeah, so good on you for putting in the good work and, like you said, like letting God's light shine through you and inspiring others. So, yeah, it's really inspiring what you're doing. I wanted to kind of, yeah, find out some more kind of nuances, if you don't mind. I know it's personal, your own journey, but I think that's where often we can find the most meaning and the most inspiration from in hearing the personal stories of one another and our own transformations. So if you don't mind going into it a bit more, like this, I like to talk to people about their own personal transformations and their personal development, spiritual growth, and personal growth in general, right? At self-actualization. So where did that start for you? You've been quite entrepreneurial for like a long time, but where did you realize that you needed to start working on yourself and changing like your character?
I think, and I haven't really talked about this, but I've become, more open to it. Um, whenever I had my daughter, I'm a single father now, and in 2022, after we'd had my daughter, me and my now ex-wife started having some issues
Okay.
whenever it came to just conflicts, and it was a common thing in my life whenever, especially in relationships. I was always a fixer. Like I think men at a
Mhm.
core are fixers, but we get
Yeah.
so busy trying to fix the needs of others or take care of others that we never actually look inward and take care of ourselves.
Yeah.
It also is really easy to fall into the trap of trying to fix and solve other people's issues without actually resolving our own issues as a band-aid to basically not have to look inward. And during that process, whenever we went through that separation, I hit some really dark moments where, I had people around me that were like, well, you should just, like it's that person's fault or that person's fault. And they would be projecting into me basically this image of the fact that like, you don't have to take responsibility for it. It really bothered me because I look at society in general and we've become we've fallen into the trap of escapism and really
Mm.
avoiding, taking ownership over what we are responsible for in our lives. And I kind of hit this point where I was like, dude, I really need to dive deep into what it is. Why is this also my fault? This can't just be one person's fault. I have to take responsibility for my actions, which is what I choose to do. And as I
Sure.
dug in, I started figuring out the fact that I was always so busy fixing other people and so busy trying to craft this image of I have it all together, so let me fix your problems, that I never actually started doing self development. And I'll share a story with you. In my early 20s, I never went to university. I never went to college. Don't have a degree. I went to a Christian high school growing up, where I fit in with a lot of the guys that smoke pot. It was easier for me to fit in with them because they didn't really care. You could
Mm.
BS and say whatever you wanted, and they were still going to accept you because in at that part of my life, the usage of marijuana was just an escapism for me personally. So it was a good way
Yeah.
for me to escape. The same people I
Sure.
surrounded myself with, we weren't taking ownership. We were just taking easy street to just kind of coast through. And
Mm.
whenever I graduated, I didn't go to university. I went for one semester and I was helping my dad out with some of his work. And what ended up transpiring is I started selling drugs, started selling weed, started selling to other people. And whenever I
Okay.
went through that process, I did what, most people do. It's just you end up making the wrong sale to the wrong person and ended up being an undercover cop. And
Mm.
I ended up going to jail for about 10 days. My dad did one of the best decisions in that
Well.
scenario. He left me in jail for 10 days and made me basically pay my way out and pay the consequences on the tail end. But during that process, I
Mhm.
actually ended up meeting a gentleman that was my court order therapist.
Okay.
I hated the guy. I absolutely couldn't stand him. And the reason I couldn't stand him was because he told me what I needed to hear, not what I wanted to hear. And at
Mm.
that point in my life, at a 20-year-old man that was just trying to figure out how to get past this as easy as possible and as painless as possible, I didn't want to hear it. And so I basically told him everything that he needed to hear so that I get my paper signed and didn't see him for years. Well, jump back to 2022. So I'm going through this really like deep dive into my soul, who I am. I read a book by a gentleman called Richard Rohr. It's called The Immortal Diamond, where he talks about the death of
Mm.
ego or the false ego, and how
Wow.
exactly to dive
Mm.
into your limbic, if you look at it from a neurological perspective, dive into your limbic system, dive into your reptilian brain, your emotional center, to figure out why are you responding to these things, like what's going on whenever it comes to being trapped in a mental maze. And as I started digging into
Mhm.
that, that's where I started realizing and noticing these, these different neural pathways that were connected to falsehoods that I had basically instilled in my own life, and I was hiding things from myself. And
Yeah. Yeah.
back to my therapist that I had when I was 20. Ironically enough, I went to a meeting to kind of figure out some things that I had gone through, and I literally turn and look, and that same therapist was there. And this would have been 14 years later. And at that point in
Wow.
my life, I was actually ready for change. I actually wanted to start embracing things. Crazy how God does that stuff. And I looked over
Sure.
at him and I walked up to him and I said, I need you because I know that you're not going to BS me. I know you're going to tell me what I need to hear, not what I want to hear.
Mhm.
And I went and I made an investment in him and started paying and going weekly. And I mean, dude, this is self-pay. So this is not insurance money. Like I am paying out of pocket a
Mm.
psychiatrist to basically talk to me. And dude, meeting with that guy and choosing the one that was going to tell me what I needed to hear, not what I wanted to hear, choosing what I needed to hear was one of the most best decisions and investments I've ever made in myself. Because going through that process, that's where he started telling me, look at young Adam, look at the lessons that he learned at a young age. Look at what is here's the result of your life. Let's look at what is behind the veil. Like what from a childhood perspective, like what from a neurological perspective, why are you making these decisions based off of your learned actions? Because me plus my past experiences equals what I do today. And so I think really, if you want to look at a pivotal moment in my life, it was going and finding people that would not tell me what I wanted to hear, but they would tell me what I needed to hear so that I could actually grow because those are the people that actually care about you.
Mm. Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, definitely. I can relate a lot to your story. Yeah, a lot of the things similar in my own life. Escapism, distracting myself, not really applying myself to anything meaningful, just kind of finding that just looking away and just finding pleasure and in kind of drugs and alcohol and partying or
Right.
whatever it is, you know. Um, and it's so interesting what you were talking about when you first went through that therapy. They were kind of like forcing you to do it right. You had no choice and you were just kind of resentful. You hated the guy and you just wanted to, I guess at that point, you just wanted to fix the symptoms, right, of the problem that was occurring. Like you have this deep seated problem, which has the symptoms of that have manifested in your life because you're distracting yourself, you're not applying yourself, you're not being the best person you can be, and you end up in jail. Like that's one of the worst case scenarios of not dealing with your internal shit. And then uh, as you realize that, oh, all these things that are happening, they are symptoms of this deep seated problem which is going on within me. And then you realize, oh, I don't need to focus on the symptoms of what's going on anymore. I need to focus on the actual problem, which are things that stem from childhood and all these things that, and then you're willing to actually into those things, like with the therapist again. It's such a coincidence, that it was the same therapist that you saw and you got treated by him. And it just shows the willingness as well that you had to transform and change. The fact that you put in money down. Um, People say like with these things, like, oh, money doesn't really matter that much. I think sometimes people say that it's like, oh, it's just money. But when you spend money on something, you become so much more committed to it. It's all offers you coaching or consulting for free. You're like, oh yeah, it's just you're not really that committed. But if you drop like, it's not cheap to have a proper psychiatrist or psychoanalyst or something like that. It adds up right over the weeks and months, and it shows you're really dedicated and you really apply what you're doing. Then, so good for you, man, for sure, for going through that all that stuff. But I think men being, like you said, fixers, we want to often fix the symptoms. Like there's something bad turning up in our lives. We want to fix that symptom, like the habit or the behavior. We want to try and recorrect that symptom. But really, we distract ourselves from the actual problem, which is all the shit that's in our backpack, right? Which is like the idea you talk about, that metaphor of unpacking the backpack. So do you want to go into that a bit more? Like, what is that? Like, what is the backpack that we carry with us? What do you usually find in there?
So it's funny you mention that. So the way that I came up with the backpack theory is during that process I mentioned earlier, I ran a service company for 8 years. So the gentleman, which I have no qualms with the guy, like he invested a lot of time and energy in me. But during that process, there were some things that were going on in his life, and I would look at him and I'd just be like, man, like I don't understand how you can be such a successful businessman and have so much tragedy in your life. And I
Mm,
started looking at my own life, and I was like, whenever I was in nightclub business, not just him, but I would run into quite a few very successful people, quite a few successful entrepreneurs that, from a financial perspective, had everything that you could ever want or dream of.
mm,
And what I kept on noticing was the fact that a lot of these people were miserable. And I've partied with some millionaires, I've partied with some billionaires. Whenever I was in club business, I went to Miami a couple times, to Vegas a couple times, and did some really crazy stuff when I came partying. And I kept on running into it and seeing this common theme of these people that just they had all the money in the world. They had all what looked like success in the world. They had worked really hard, but like they had no genuine joy and happiness truly
right.
inside themselves. And like it was like
Mm,
even whenever you go to parties, you'd look at these people and they would be there and they would be paying the tab, but like they would be so isolated and so distant from the present. And it just made me start thinking like, what could possibly have
mm,
gone on in their past to where they would be so disassociated in a moment where everybody else is trying to find so much happiness. And so the more that I kind of saw that, I sat down and started thinking about, the context between that and our subconscious and our unconscious mind. And whenever you look at a backpack, right? A backpack is something that we carry. If you look at it in an analogy, and we took the backpack and we looked at that being compared to our subconscious and unconscious mind, right? So the
sure.
backpack as a
Okay.
whole is our subconscious. It's basically
Hmm.
something that we wake up every single day and we've got that backpack on our back, right? Like we've
Mm,
got our subconscious. It's constantly running in your mind. You've got the little small pockets on the backpack, and that could be your unconscious mind or the things that, you have whenever it comes to your very deep limbic system or your hypothalamus, which is your storage in your brain, basically. And you can't really access that information directly while you're awake. You typically do that whenever you're asleep, especially in like a REM sleep cycle, which is why dreams, a lot of times we have dreams about things that are in our present moments, is because our brain is basically trying to, it's trying to uh, go through an encrypted message that we receive during the day at night so that it can basically solve like why this went on. I
mm,
digress. But whenever it comes to the backpack, it's basically like your subconscious. And every day you wake up, whatever you are carrying from the previous days goes into your subconscious, and you carry that into actions your next day. So if we look at this from a neurological perspective, your neuropathways, your neurons are the core center of basically, that tells the neural pathway how to create a synaptic process or a decision in real time in your conscious mind. And so whenever we
mhm,
look at your backpack, your subconscious, whenever you, for instance, walk into a sushi restaurant, if maybe whenever you were 10 years old, you had a bad experience whenever it came to sushi, or maybe your mom didn't like sushi, or maybe someone else didn't like sushi in your friend circle. So therefore, you started building this negative connotation with sushi. You're probably not going to pick sushi on the menu whenever you walk into that restaurant. You're going to pick hibachi or something else. Well,
mhm,
if we look at our backpack has a lot of layers of those kind of memories that will directly affect our current decision making on a daily basis. And so what
mhm.
happens is basically if you look at a backpack, right, and you're going on a journey, you only want in your backpack what you need for that journey, correct?
Yeah.
Well, if you're not
Yeah, makes
constantly
sense.
going in and reevaluating your backpack, if you don't understand what's going on in your unconscious mind, if you don't understand what's going on in your subconscious mind, it's
Mm,
very hard for you to make accurate decisions based off of what your current circumstances are if you are dragging all of that past baggage into your present. And so the
mhm,
theory of the backpack theory and why I started writing the book is because I wanted to understand why do people do what they do? Why do millionaires, why do people that seem highly successful and highly motivated carry so much baggage on their past? And like, you can look at
mhm.
these people and you're like, why are you so miserable? Well, the more you look into it, if you looked at that backpack, there's layers upon layers of neuropathways, layer upon layers of memories that basically have not been dealt with. They have not been sorted through. And so they're carrying that baggage into every single day. And,
Sure.
sometimes the bag can get heavy and you can find resilience in that. But if you don't ever go into that backpack and get to the very bottom root cause of
Hmm.
why you take actions every day, you're never actually going to realize what your purpose is. You're never actually going to realize where you're going if you don't understand completely where you've come from. And so that is a high level thought process of the backpack theory. And why I've integrated that into my podcast is because we unpack past experiences
Hmm.
with people on the podcast to help define a better future. So we can look at where we came from to understand why we do what we do today, and then understand what we want to do with that information to transform where we're going.
Awesome, man. Yeah, yeah. I think it's really, really great concept and a great theory, and it helps to visualize it and bring it into this kind of tangible scene where you think, oh, this is my backpack, it's my unconscious mind, my subconscious mind. And I can actually go in there and take these things out. And yeah, you like you said, you're on a journey, and throughout your life, you might pick up like sentimentos or like things along your journey, and like, oh, I'll put that in the backpack without really thinking about it, maybe, and then you forget it's there. And then you get to a point in your life and you think, God, this backpack is heavy, man. And then like, what's in here? And it's all cluttered. You got all this crap you don't need anymore. It's like, oh, that was a nice memory kind of thing, but it's kind of tainted maybe with this tragedy or something that's happened that you haven't really dealt with. You haven't really processed it. You just pushed it down. Like, oh, I don't remember that, so I just stuff it to the bottom of the backpack. Yeah, yeah. It's such a great theory. And um, so having these conversations with people on your podcast, what do you find like are the common themes a lot of the time, say, with these people that are coming in? Is it a lot of childhood stuff? Is it things that happen in teens? Because a lot of time I think the kind of trauma or the adverse kind of emotional reactions we can have are quite different from childhood to being your teens. And I think they affect you quite differently because we're really engaging with the world in a different way. So I'm not sure if you've thought about that, but like, what do you think are the kind of commonalities? What are the patterns that you're seeing?
So there's a beautiful. Have you ever read Atomic Habits by James Clear?
Yeah, yeah.
So in that book, I read it, and it was one of the books that impacted me the most whenever it came to my life, my personal development.
Hmm.
And in the book, he's speaking to the fact that small, intricate habits every single day basically manifest into the life that you want. That's the
Sure.
premise of the book.
Hmm.
So I was very fascinated in why that is, right? Like why does stacking habits, like why does that matter? And so my hobby, whenever I can't figure out what something is, we have the internet. And so information is at our fingertips, literally. It's just most of us
Hmm.
have a lot of information and we fail to apply it. So therefore we live in ignorance.
Sure.
And I went and read some medical, I went and actually, I love reading medical journal articles and actual like hard research and looking at like data analysis whenever it comes to different medical journals and studies that they did. And so
Sure.
as I was going and looking at it, I went and did the research of what is the science behind habit stacking. And there's a beautiful
Hmm.
process that transpires in each one of us, especially from age 0 to age 18. And it is called synaptic pruning.
Hmm.
So what is happening is some children from age 1 to 5 are creating 30,000 neurons a day. So 30,000 new processes, 30,000 yes to one thing, no to one thing, understanding,
Mhm.
you know, the light glimmers off the water this way, or when the wave hits this, like we're being programmed.
Sure.
Um, and whenever it comes to synaptic pruning, basically, as you get older, you prune off more and more neural pathways. So, for instance, and
Mhm.
whenever you're young, you're a lot more formative to develop those things. And
Sure.
so, basically, if we looked at it like writing code, correct? Whenever you write
Mhm.
code, there's layers of code. Now, with AI, now you can go on and look at that code and it kind of makes it easier to decode it or look for like items where they might be wrongly encrypted. But in
Mhm.
ourselves, as our brains are developing, especially in those formative years, and because we're firing off so many neurons, you're creating these layers upon layers upon layers of yeses and nos to certain circumstances, or we are building our identity. And so,
Sure.
whenever you look at that, the reason that childhood is so important and why so many people don't ever get back to it is because unless you're very intentional about it, you can't find that out. And so I'm a
Mhm.
strong believer that if you look at the science behind it, your childhood and while your emotional center and while your limbic system and your hypothalamus is developing at a very young age, that is at the core, or that is going to be the closest to who you are. And I'll refer back to the book Immortal Diamond, and I'll refer to the Bible. You know, God really talks about in the Bible the fact that, like, you know, if you want to get to the truest form, or like if you want to look at the people that are closest to God, look at children. And the reason is because they're pure, they're untainted, they are developing
Mhm.
basically their identity. And so I do think that whenever you go into your teenage years, there's a lot of learned behaviors that you had whenever you were, you know, 0 to 5 or 0 to 8. And whenever you get into
Mhm.
middle school, a lot of that starts manifesting because you've said no to so many things and yes to so many things, or you've had so many different experiences that it just starts manifesting in your life because you actually, you know, at that point, your parents aren't around, right? So, like, there's no restrictions
Mhm.
on you. You have a cell phone. You start running into friends that have also
Mhm.
started forming their identity. And so I think it manifests in your life more in your teens and your early 20s, and in your early 20s especially, because if you go to university or you
Sure.
go to college, you
Mhm.
know, you then get to take all of those neural pathways and all of those learned behaviors and start applying them into real life. And so I would state that the majority of your identity and who you are is formed based off of science from age 0 to age 5. That's why,
Mhm.
you know, if you look at a true narcissist, which is a big hot word right now, a true
Yeah.
narcissist is someone who can literally have no empathy for anybody else. If you look at the United States, there was a beautiful
Mhm.
book called The Narcissistic Epidemic that was written, and it really goes to modern society with social media, the internet, and everything else. All of us are mildly narcissist. I don't care how you look at it. I don't care if you're a woman, man, whatever. Everybody's mildly narcissist because everybody has a little tinge of wanting acceptance and wanting to put forward this best image. A true
Mhm.
narcissist has no empathy. Most true narcissists had some kind of childhood traumatic experience during their developmental process from a very young age, to where they literally, like, think about it, from age 1 to like 3, like,
Mhm.
you can only think about yourself. You can all give, 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 give. Like, what are you going to do?
Mhm.
You're not going to tell your parents what to do. You can cry. You can kind of learn how to start saying no. But like, you are solely reliant on other people, right? And so if something very
Mhm.
traumatic happens to you at that age, then it is going to be very hard for you to ever empathize with anybody else because all you're worried about is taking care of yourself. And so I think that there's these levels of
Mhm.
transcendence to where if you are nurtured correctly, if you do go through the developmental process that allows you to start forming an identity, and it doesn't just, your identity is not just you, it's not just self-preservation and you can evolve. I think there's different levels of transcendence to where you can kind of start developing a more like wholeness or world perspective to where you can make a larger impact. But I think so many
Sure.
people during those primitive years do not actually have the opportunity to form that identity because they end up getting trapped in some kind of, you know, whether it be traumatic experience or something else. And I think today in our world that introduced more and more to these micro traumas, which is why people have a hard time actually forming identity as they age.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. You covered a lot of ground there. That was great. So I've got a few thoughts there. The what you're talking about there about that transcendence of becoming more in service to humanity and to community and things like that. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs conceptualize that really well, right? So
Right.
the top is self-actualization. And I guess if you have some sort of traumatic experience or some like complex PTSD over your childhood, and you feel unsafe, basically, you feel like your needs aren't being met, and you feel like the world is an unsafe place, and you're constantly in danger. So you're constantly looking out for yourself. So how can I really help anyone else out when I need to look after myself because this is a dangerous place because I've been hurt before and I need to be like extra vigilant and careful. Otherwise, I might just get hurt again. So you can't then move up through those hierarchy of needs. You're kind of stuck at one level, right?
Right.
You can't move up through those levels. Uh, as an aside on those levels, they stack on top of one another as well. If you think about self-actualization, it's not just something that you can skip past all the other levels. They kind of rely on one another. You can't get to self-actualization without having like a roof over your head and things like that, and having like enough food and clothes and making enough money and having family and all these things. It's like, oh well, I could just go and meditate in a cave for like 6 months and I'll become self-actualized, right? It's like, well, no, you may become enlightened, but that's very different to being self-actualized, because
Yes.
actualization is actualizing your full potential in the world, which is integrating into society and to civilization and to family and all these social hierarchies in the best way possible, and then fulfilling your potential in that way. That was kind of just an aside there, but when we're growing up, there's lots of big events that can happen to people that can be traumatizing, like you covered. Like someone can have a traumatizing event and then they kind of in that um, constant danger state for the rest of their lives until they deal with that stuff. Um, but for some people, including me, like a few years ago, probably 4, 5 years ago, I always said to my friend who is a emotional healing coach, I was like, I got no trauma. I had a great childhood. There's no trauma for me. I'm fine. But when I started to dig deeper and look into unpack my backpack deeper and deeper and kind of go into those little pockets into the unconscious mind and stuff as well and do the shadow work, I realized that for me, it wasn't traumatic events, but it was like more longer period over time. So it's things like emotional neglect, complex PTSD, potentially just not getting your needs met as a child, and that can really affect you. And I think a lot of people in adulthood, especially, can fall into that the same as me, where they say, "My childhood was fine. Nothing happened. I wasn't ever abused. Nothing bad happened to me," but they didn't realize that we are all human. We all have certain needs, and if those needs aren't met as children, it might not be our parents' fault because our parents might just be doing their best, right?
Yes.
But as children, like you said, everything's about you. You're like a pure narcissist. So even if your parents can't give you the attention you need, and it's not because of you, they've just got loads of shit going on, like bad things happen. Maybe there's a war, like imagine in like the Middle East or in Ukraine, and all these children are growing up thinking, my parents don't love me because they're not giving them the attention that they need as a physiological being, or a mammal anyway. And yeah, that can get buried deep, deep down in that backpack, and you carry it for the rest of your life. And you think of like you're not worthy of love. You don't feel like you're someone who is valuable. You feel like you're not enough, and that can, yeah, it can really affect you. And then you end up seeking validation, right, for like so many years as an adult. And I think that might play back into like you were talking about all these entrepreneurs and business people that are really rich. It's like what was the motivation? Why do they really want to have that much money? Is it have they really thought about it? Is it something that they want just loads of freedom, or is it something that they're doing for validation and they want to feel like they're validated by other people by doing well, and that makes them feel okay about themselves, makes them feel loved. But really, it's backwards because they're not getting that validation for their inherent worth, right? And maybe that's why they're miserable.
Yeah. I was sitting down with a gentleman yesterday and we were kind of going through a coaching session and I really care about this client a lot because I see a lot of myself in him. And he grew up in an environment to where, he was always pushed to be like the absolute best version of perfection. And a lot of his
Mm-hmm.
siblings ended up living up to that. And his father was a doctor. So he
Mm-hmm.
was very, his dad did very well. And so his dad was an overachiever and really projected that onto him. And so now he's in a role to where, he never is quite measured up whenever it comes to what his siblings have done and everybody else has done. And so he views himself as a failure, which
Mm-hmm.
is hard to dig into, but after we've been doing a lot of deep work, and he's gotten tremendously better, but he also has self-sabotaging
Mm-hmm.
behaviors to where basically like, he will, as soon as he gets like one win, like he wants to let everybody know that he's like conquered the world, and then it turns them off, and then he doesn't understand why everybody's not celebrating with him because he's so worried about it being accepted. And there's one thing in particular that he's been wanting to accomplish, and it's this program to go and network with other businesses, which is kind of outside of the realm of his responsibility in his current position in the
Okay.
career he's in. And he
Mm-hmm.
keeps on talking about it and keeps on talking about it and keeps on going, well, once I, the common phrase was, well, once I have, this much money, or once I have this car, or
Mm-hmm.
once, these people respect me enough, then I can go out and I can talk to these businesses, and then I can do this. But I need people to give me the right amount of respect to do it. And I just looked at him and I said, dude, you know, and this is very, very, very common. Um, I think we have this perception that people only accept us for what we have. And the reality of the situation is that the right people don't do business or care for you because of what you have. The right people will do business or care for you because of who you are and why you do it.
Mm-hmm.
And that who you are is where we get lost so many times because we don't actually know who we are. We
Mm-hmm.
just see this world of materialism to where it's like, once I have the car, once I have the girl, once I have the house, once I
Mm-hmm.
have these things in my life, or once I have the fruit of my labor, then I can actually start making a difference. I interviewed a gentleman on a podcast yesterday. His name is Akash Patel. He's on so the UN, the United Nations, has they have like different divisions based off of whatever country they're in. So like in the United States, there's like the UN Association of the United States. So like it is like the underbody, if you will, of the UN delegates. And so he is actually the
Sure.
chair for the United States division of the United Nations.
Okay.
And he was a foreign national. He moved to um, Oklahoma as an Indian at a very, very young age. And one of the big things he noticed whenever he moved here was, the amount of people that treated him differently based off of the fact that he could barely speak English, he was
Mm-hmm.
Indian, and all these things. And it was very interesting. Um, as we kind of got into discussion and started talking about, what he's doing today, which now he has an organization that's in 150 countries that puts webcams into classrooms in both inner city and rural areas to connect students in like the United States with students in Asia or students
Okay.
in India to break down those social barriers. And as we got
Mm-hmm.
into it, I asked him, I was like, we started talking about it. I'm like, well, who told you to do it? Nobody told me to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I just saw the fact that it needed to be done, and inside I knew who I was as a person. I knew how that felt. And instead of waiting for someone to tell me, or waiting for the technology to be perfect, or waiting for everything to manifest in my life to make the bigger impact, he's like, I just started making an impact. And now, dude, he you're in 150 countries, and you have you now are on the you're the chair of in association with one of the largest associations in the world. But it took him knowing who he was, valuing who he was, and not waiting for him to have things to make the impact and difference. And as leaders, as
Mm-hmm.
men, so many times we compare ourselves. Like it would be very easy for you to look at my podcast, or for you to look at Joe Rogan's podcast, or the Diary of the Stephen Bartlett, right? You could look
Mm-hmm.
at their podcast and go, well, once I have the connections, once I have the money, once I have the studio, then I'll start recording a podcast. No, that's not how it works. You got to figure out
Mm,
who you are. You got to figure out what your purpose is. And then you just start
mm,
making actions to work towards that purpose because that's how everybody started.
yeah.
And the biggest thing about it, though, is if you're just going for the material, if you're just going for the accolades, if you're just going for the end result and you're not enjoying the process of who you're becoming during it, then
Mm,
you might get there one day and realize that everything you worked for wasn't what you wanted because you never actually knew who you were and what you actually wanted.
uh, yeah, that's so true. So true. There's this definition of narcissist that I heard before. So when you hear the word narcissist, you always think of someone who's a horrible person, always puts themselves before everyone else, right? And it's just this horrible, unemotional, unempathetic asshole, right? But then uh, there's also the self-centered, self-sacrificing narcissist who is the validation addict, and that person they do so much for other people. Like say, you put other people first. You try and fix other people's problems without looking at your own issues. But you're doing it not from a place of genuine service, but you're doing it from a place because you're seeking the validation. Because you feel like if I'm not a good person, I'm not going to help these people, and they're not going to say, "Oh my God, you're amazing, thank you so much." Then you don't feel like you are a good person, and that just it completely broke. I'm not sure if like in the mainstream vernacular, that would be classed as someone who is a narcissist, but it is someone who's self centered and still self motivated. They want to do things for their own benefit, not genuinely for the benefit of others. It's definitely better than the alternative narcissist, right? Who's hurting people at their own benefit, but someone who's helping people because they want to get that validation back. And I had Alex Hormozy talk about this before when he was talking about kind of success and getting to the other side of it and feeling like, oh, once I get to that point, then I'll be okay. Like it was kind of what you're talking about there. Like, oh, I need to do all these things. And then once I get there, I can actually do what I really want. I can actually help the people that I want to help then. Um, I felt like that for years. I was like going through my personal development, building up these different areas of life, like sorting out my health and sorting out my relationship, sorting out my business, and like building up all these things and traveling and doing all the things I want to do. And I got to a point where I pretty much got everything to a level where I was like, well, I'm pretty much living my dream life. And I didn't really feel any different.
Mm.
Like I had this idea that once I had it all, then I'd be okay. Like once I get that thing, once I do that thing, then I'll be okay. And when I got there, I was just like, oh, it's just me. I'm not really much different. I feel pretty much the same. Yeah, I've learned lots of things, I've developed skills, and I've developed myself and become more resilient and more capable. But my sense of okayness, my self acceptance is still exactly the same. And then I'm thinking, oh, there's some then that kind of that validation part of me comes in and goes, oh, maybe I need to do this next thing. And then I'll be okay once I do that.
Right.
Right. And I think that comes from I think a deep sense of lack of self worth. There's this distinguished concept that a guy that I met called John Niland, who wrote a book called The Self-Worth Safari, and he splits up the ideas of self-esteem and self-worth. So he says self-esteem is things that are um, things that you have to do or have to feel good about yourself. So once I get that job, once I get that car, once I start the business, once I get that partner, then I can feel good about myself. And it's attached to those things. Whereas self-worth is the opposite. It's you already feel good about yourself, but then you can realize you can do those things anyway. And I think for me, that was a huge shift in my mindset to learn that, to think I don't have to do those things to feel okay, to get validation from others. I can feel okay, know who I am, right? Have that deep rooted, like foundational sense of identity that you were talking about. And then everything I do is not to pursue a goal, but just as an expression of who I am. And I think so. We can go into now your idea of solving why. And I think that's such a big part of it. You were talking about identity and things like that. And I'd like to go into maybe uh, what you perceive identity to actually be. I think that could be an interesting topic because you're obviously like you're really interested in neuroscience and things like that. So if we can talk about that, and then we'll go into the solving why stuff. Uh, but like, what is it that is someone's identity? Because a lot of people think, oh, I'm a husband or a dad or a business person, or I'm this age, or I'm their race or something, or a gender. That's what they think their identity is. But I don't. I mean, I don't really know. I don't know how to define it exactly. But what do you think it is?
Well, I think um, whatever comes to identity, I think it's really rooted far beyond whenever you were first born. I think identity is learned behaviors. Part of my program that I do is I have these different thought-provoking processes for people to kind of like realize where they're at because you run into so many people that they'll be like, well, I'm this way because of my parents, right? Or I'm this way because of
Mm,
this, or I'm this way because of this. The reality is that you are where you are today and you are who you are, and your identity is what it is based off of my past experiences equal my past experiences, me plus my past experiences equal who I am today or why I act. And
mm,
so, if you really trace it back, there's a phrase called generational curses. I don't know if you've ever heard of that or not.
yeah.
Our identity, a lot of
Yeah.
times, has been formed over centuries, and we don't
Mm,
even realize it. Our identity is in our genetics. Our identity is based off of whatever socioeconomic environment you're born into. Our identity is based off of so many different factors. And so, what typically happens with your average person, at least in Western culture in the United States, is typically you'll have like grandparents that basically treated you have multiple sets of grandparents, right? Because like it's a tree, it's a family tree,
mm,
a tree of genetics, which is related to cancer and all these other things. And typically what happens is people just accept what has been given to them, and that becomes their identity. So
mm,
if your grandpa's an alcoholic, your dad probably became an alcoholic, which probably means that you're an alcoholic, which means that you identify as an alcoholic. If you're on the flip side of that, if you are also an alcoholic and your mom was the people, your grandma was, basically didn't say anything to your grandpa, so therefore your mom doesn't say anything to your dad about alcoholism, you're going to pick a partner that doesn't say anything to you about alcoholism because that has been a generational reoccurring thing in your life. So therefore,
mm,
you then view yourself, depending on how self-aware you are, as someone who doesn't get a lot of feedback from their partner because that's who you picked. So your identity tip is we fall into hypnosis or societal hypnosis to where we allow everything that has happened into our life to form who we are today. And so what I really try to do is
mm,
try to tell people and I try to take them and say, hey, listen, like, dude, like our identity is so complicated based off of so many factors. It's
mm,
so complex. And, that is why I think as a society today, especially if you look at the generations, the millennials, the Gen Zers, the Gen Xers, like, you look at this kind of transition and then, I don't know what they're calling the super young kids today, but you look at these different generations and you're starting to see this revolt back whenever it comes to people wanting to actually find purpose because they've been told so long what they should do and who they should be. And from a human standpoint, like you can only program people so far before their reptilian brains start actually revolting against what they were created to do because
mm.
everybody is created for a different purpose. And we have to understand that. Now, how do you form a new identity? Well, I think that first it goes back to the backpack theory. You have to understand not only where you came from, where your parents came from, or where your grandparents came from, but not like from a genetic standpoint. Like you truly need to understand the people that they were by going and investigating that to understand why you do what you do today. After solving that, I personally, and this goes into the solving why program a little bit, if you don't mind me jumping into that.
Yeah, go ahead, man. Yeah.
Whenever it comes to solving why, the reason that I call it solving why was Simon Sinek's inside out thinking. So why, how, and what
Mm,
I do, right? So many people are just caught up on what I do, which is basically that's where people get stuck on identity. It's like, well, if I walked up to you and I was like, and this is part of my process is I've got 8 questions I ask everybody. And the first question that I ask people is, who are you? right? And people are, but the answer to all these questions, you have to answer with one word. That's it. You can't answer with multiple words. You have to answer with one word. So I ask everybody, the first two questions are, who are you? And then what do
Ask,
you do?
ask. Can you ask me? Can you run
Yeah,
through it?
like, who are you?
Human.
And what do you do?
Live.
Okay, that's a good answer. You're a little bit more self-aware. I'll tell you right now, who
Okay.
are you typically? People will say something that is based off of what they
Like
want people to
John,
think.
the name or
They'll
role,
say
something
their
like that.
name or
Yeah.
they'll say what they want people to think of them.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
This the second one typically
Millionaire.
is
Millionaire.
yeah, millionaire or strong or like these different things. And then the
Sure.
second the second one is typically their job. Typically, when you ask
Mm,
people, what do you do? They go, well, I'm a fireman or roofer or engineer.
mm,
And so many times whenever you're in social settings, well, what do you do? Your first reaction is, well, I'm a podcaster or I'm a
yeah.
life coach, right? And so I have started to kind of try to disrupt this mindset. When people ask, what do you do? I say, in reference to what?
Yeah. Like, what's the context? I think in most contexts, people are thinking like, "Oh, what do you do for a job?" or whatever. What's your career? But
But that is our, so your core personality, which is based off industrialism and is what, if you look at the world,
mm,
what is needed, your value or your identity is rooted in what you do for a career. And the
mhm,
problem is that if you've fallen into that career and you don't really know why you fell into that career and you don't find a purpose behind the purpose or a purpose behind the identity, whenever you hit the point, which is what we're hitting right now in society, whenever it comes to the boomers, they don't want to retire. They literally do not want to retire. It's the largest transfer of generational wealth in human history, and they don't want to let go of it, and they don't want to let go of their positions because they literally have no identity outside of their career. And so
mm,
what typically happens with people is, you go through these series of questions, and through the 8 questions, you'll get different answers on every single one. Like one is, what do other people, if other people were going to say one word about you, what would they say? And or like, what do you admire? And
mhm,
typically, each one of these answers is different.
mhm.
And I'll tell you this, the secret to the sauce is every single one of those answers should be the exact same thing. It's like you ask me, like who are you? I would say hope. What do you do? Hope.
Okay.
What do others people think about you? Hope. I
So
because
that's
we
pure like
complicate.
pure like alignment. You're completely aligned. Every part of your being, from your very internal, most internal place to your most external place, which is your interaction with society and the world.
Period.
Right. All
And it
in
is, and
line.
you can
Mm,
take that singularity, that one thing, and you can apply it to any area of your life. So like I woke up this morning, right? I'll give you an
mm.
example. So I woke up this morning and my first reaction, because I don't have my home podcast studio anymore. I have this beautiful
Okay.
podcast studio
Hey,
now with all of this
hey, Adam.
equipment.
Adam, can I ask you, what did you have for breakfast?
I had a Kai's nutrition bar, and then I
Oh,
had about eight
you
different.
didn't have a bowl of hope?
I didn't have a bowl of hope, no. But what I will tell you is that I woke up this morning, and the first thing I do when I wake up is I say 5 gratitudes. So
Nice.
the
That's
first
great.
thing mentally
Mm.
I say whenever I wake up is I'm grateful that I woke up. I'm grateful for my girlfriend. I'm grateful for my daughter. I'm grateful for, the fact that I get to go jump on this podcast today. I'm grateful for this. So I wake up in a
Awesome.
mindset of gratitude or a mindset of hope, right?
Yeah.
Then I basically go directly in and I say a prayer with my higher power. Then I make my bed. Like those are the first three things I do in the morning. But what was
Hmm.
really interesting is during the time of gratitude, as I was saying that this morning, last night, my interpretation was, well, I'm going to go to bed. I'm going to wake up and I'm going to go into my office, my home office, and basically record the podcast. And then, when I woke up and I'm going in to go, automatically I go, you know what? Like, if I'm going to get on this podcast and Crystal's going to invest in spending this time with me, I'm going to go to my studio. I'm going to try to get everything set up, and I'm going to try to make sure that whatever message of hope that I'm conveying to people is in the best format possible. Now, I came down here and everything didn't work out the way that it did, and I very easily could have said, well, you know what? The camera's not perfect. The lighting's not perfect. I don't have my camera. I don't have my thing. Krista, like, let's reschedule. But that wouldn't be living out hope. Hope would be is
Hmm.
that I'm going to still jump on this podcast without the right audio, without the correct camera, without the right setup. Because if I'm living hope every day, it doesn't matter what my circumstances are or what I have. It
Hmm.
matters who I am. And if who I am is hope, then I would want other people, if they watch this podcast, to go, you know what? This guy literally, he has all these other things, but it doesn't matter. Like, he's still going to jump on his iPhone's freaking camera and record this podcast, because that's what a person or an action of hope would be, is showing people that regardless where you're at, there's nothing in your life that is holding you back from being your true self. There is no circumstance that can hold you back from starting a podcast. There's no circumstance that will
Hmm.
hold you back from living out your purpose today. But we get so convoluted. Like, if I had been like, well, my identity is my camera setup, and my identity is the breakfast that I had, and my identity is the audio, and my identity is the car that I drove here. If that was what I was concerned about, then I would have never jumped on this podcast today, and I would live in analysis paralysis. And you can't do that as a human. It's non-functional. And so I try to boil everything down to a singularity, so that your circumstances are always going to change, Christo. They're always going to change. It does not matter. Every day is going to be different. And if you live, and if your identity is based off of your current circumstances, you will never actually live out your purpose, because you're never actually going to get there. One of my
Hmm.
coaching modules that I have is based off of resilience, and in that podcast, I tell a story about a hike I took up to a lake that I planned my entire trip around. And to give you the short summary of it, I ended up getting to that lake that I had hiked to like 4 years before, and the experience ended up being nothing like what I had envisioned it to be. And so I had a choice in that scenario on my hike down, one of two things. Either I could find gratitude in the moment, or I could continue to be miserable. And I ended up reframing it into a
Hmm.
beautiful experience and ended up having a great day. But so many times we envision the Ferrari, or we envision the house, or we envision the girlfriend, or we envision the career. And then once we get there, we were chasing something to be accepted, instead of just accepting ourselves where we were before we had the thing.
Yeah, man, that's such a powerful message. Definitely. So finding hope in where you are and who you are right now, rather than having that hope because of the external circumstances, right? And that's such a it's a very Christian message as well. Like being content. There's that song Gyra. I'm not sure if you listen to worship music.
Yeah,
Like
I
I
love
will,
that.
yeah, I will be content in any circumstance. Like just listening to that, I love worship music, because it's such a positive message. It reminds me of these things that I tend to forget all the time, and you can get caught up in the moment and caught up in the circumstances. But that spirit of gratitude that can be there from within you because you have hope from within you rather than in the circumstances around you. Yeah, it's so powerful. And I love that message of having that kind of human, I think some people call it human alignment. So every part of your being is aligned in the same way, and that would that ties into the concept of individualization, right, from Carl Jung. So uh, he thought that we're all these kind of segmented, fragmented, fractured people, and the process that we have to go through, like the process of self-actualization, is where you bring all those fragmented aspects of yourself into individuality, into one thing as an individual. So it means indivisible, like you are one and you can't be broken anymore into different parts. And I think that's what happens with so many people, right? We have all these different goals and things like that, and we have these different kind of entities within us, or maybe what they are is those shitty heavy weights in our backpack, and they're pulling us in different directions, like homing beacons. Right, this one's saying, "Oh, I want to go and get validation from women." This one's saying, "I need to go and get validation from my peers." This one's saying, "Oh, I just need to curl up in a ball and eat ice cream and watch Netflix binge series," kind of thing. And like then one of them's in there maybe, which is that message of hope. And the true identity is saying, what could you truly be? What is your potential? Who are you really? And where do you think you find that? Do you think that's found in your backpack once you start unpacking it? Do you find yourself in there, or is it something that you find in the world?
Well, number one, I love Carl Jung. Archetypes, and studying the different
Mm-hmm.
kind of archetypes and the connectivity, if you will, like the collective consciousness and the concept of
Mm-hmm.
dreams. Like, I've done a lot of dream analysis, and that
Okay.
is something that if you've never done before, so if you take about 6 months and every single morning you wake up and journal your dreams,
Mm-hmm.
dude, you will find some creepy stuff. I no longer actually believe, not creepy, but really cool. I no
Sure.
longer, I
Creepy and
no
cool.
Oh, dude, I no longer, I'll tell you right now, as crazy as this might sound, I no longer believe in deja vu. It doesn't exist. It's a projection of your dream, which basically calculates on your current environment where you're going and what it's a map equation basically. It's taking all of this jumbled mess and it's putting it into an actual visualization of where you're probably going to go. And that's kind of like Carl Jung. And, he really looked at dreams and he really looked at personality types and really did a lot of research on it. And
Mm-hmm.
he's one of my favorite being him, C.S. Lewis, as well as Freud. Freud was an interesting, I don't agree with his analysis of dreams because he really based it off of sexual repression, which I don't agree with. I think that was probably a
Mm-hmm.
projection based off of what my understanding is of his personal life. But yeah, these
Right.
archetypes, like
Yeah.
these combinations of all of these personalities, a combination of all of these situations, really manifest in who you are today. And whenever you're talking about, how do you get to that identity? How do you get to that hope? Well, I'll tell you, it's pretty simple. We started this conversation. I told you about 5-year-old Adam, right?
Mm.
And I told you 5-year-old Adam heard a message, which was not my parents' fault. It was nobody's fault. My parents are great people. They did the best they could with the tools they've been given in their circumstances. But
Yeah.
I went into a church and that I heard, the message that I heard at 5 years old was if you are not perfect,
Mm-hmm.
God will not accept you. And so what did I do? Well, based off of just humanity, I know you can't be perfect. There's no way. I looked at my parents, they would make mistakes. At 5 years old, like you recognize this stuff, right? So at that
Mm-hmm.
point, I decided consciously, even though I was 5 years old, I still decided as I got older, you know what? I'm just going to lie a little bit because I can never be who I am because if I am who I am, then God will not accept me. So I
Mm-hmm.
lived the majority of my life completely hopeless. I gave up hope on little Adam. I gave up hope on the fact that I could ever actually be who God created me to be. I gave up hope that whenever I worked at clubs, I couldn't just tell people that I was the VIP host and general manager. I had to tell them that I was the owner. I gave
Mm-hmm.
up hope whenever it came to past relationships, not accepting the person for who they were, but accepting their potential because I didn't accept who I was. I lived my life hopeless, Crystal. And the beautiful thing about your imperfections, the beautiful thing about your backpack, and the beautiful thing about that story is whatever your largest kryptonite is, whatever your largest fear is, whatever your largest insecurity is, if you utilize it correctly, it can become your identity through God. And so I was fortunate enough to look at 5-year-old little hopeless Adam and write a letter to little 5-year-old Adam and let him know what he's accomplished in life. Let him know what he's overcome. Let him know that his mom that passed away from bone marrow cancer this year after a long battle with cancer, after 2 years of the hardest years of my life, going from making, $400,000 in one year to completely leaving a consulting gig that I made really good money on to pursue something that was outside of myself, like walking away and letting little Adam know that there is hope. You
Mm-hmm.
don't have to be hopeless anymore. You don't have to live in the shadow of falsehoods. You can be yourself. You can accept the insecurities in your life. You can accept the imperfections and you can allow God's light to shine through all of that to impact other people. And so, my answer to you is whatever your biggest fear is, whatever your biggest insecurity is, the opposite of that thing is normally what your true identity is. And if you can solve why you were created, if you can solve why you do what you do, if you can solve why you get in the maze and you get confused, you can
Mm-hmm.
then start looking at, okay, I was hopeless. Now I can share that with other people to spread hope to as many people as possible. It doesn't matter if it's the barista at the coffee shop. It doesn't matter if it's someone listening to this podcast. It doesn't matter if it's the cashier at Walmart or Sam's Club or wherever you go. It doesn't matter if I'm on vacation and there's the maid in the room and she's having a bad day and you smile. You can live
Mm-hmm.
every single day letting people know that they don't have to live the way they lived their entire life, running away from who they truly are. And so, me personally, I
Mm-hmm.
inspire hope in others because the way that I live my life, and I tell this story so many times, if I get off this podcast today, and I literally said this on the podcast yesterday, and I'll keep on saying it. If I get off this podcast today, I leave here, I get hit by a truck, and for some reason you are the last person I ever talked to, what are you going to say at my eulogy? If you're the one that tells my eulogy, are you going to stand up there and say, you know what, Adam had a sweet freaking gold chain and a black shirt and had a cool podcast studio? I hope not. I hope not, man. I hope not. I hope if you stood up at my funeral and told my eulogy, and it doesn't matter if the coffee person's that same person. I hope you stand up and you say, you know what, that dude inspired hope in my life. And if I live every day with that kind of intentionality, then I've lived out my purpose. That is my identity, and I've done my God-given duty to this world.
Well, that sounds like integration, man, for sure. You've integrated yourself, and sounds like you're an individual. You're an individual that lives, breathes, sleeps, eats hope. You know, and that's, I think, what individuation is, and what you're talking about there of what your biggest fear is, the biggest insecurity, the biggest thing. I've conceptualized it before. It's the biggest thing you're avoiding. And Carl Jung talks about this as well, that when there's something in your life that you are avoiding, like something you keep putting off, something that the biggest thing that you're worried about or insecure about is, like you said, where you find like the treasure. That's in my mind, that's like the cave that you fear to enter, right? From Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey. And the cave you fear to enter, the one cave that you fear to enter the most holds the treasure that you seek. And the treasure that you seek is exactly what you're talking about, is being completely integrated, where you don't need external validation anymore. You have a purpose. You know why you're here. And if you die tomorrow, that's okay. You're completely okay with it. That's so powerful, man. The biggest indicator I've found, what I realized is, for my level of spiritual fitness is how okay I am with my own mortality. So if I go, well, if I was to die now, today, how okay am I about that? And some days I'm like, fuck no, I don't want to die. I got all this shit I like want to do, you know. But that's not me being surrendering to God. Right? That's me trying to be in control. That's things I want to do, and me maybe thinking I'm not living up to my potential right now, and there's things I need to do to get to that point. And if I die, I won't be able to do it. But when you're living in that place where I am my potential, I'm integrated, I'm an individual, I'm actualizing my purpose in the world, it doesn't matter when you die. Which is, it's that, man. Yeah, hopeful message. And I think that's what enlightenment is as well. And that's basically the definition of enlightenment, and that's when you can walk hand in hand with God. I want to finish on this idea of purpose and your why. And some people will feel like they have to find their purpose because it was something that was kind of like, it was kind of orchestrated before they came into life. Like, oh, why is my purpose? It's like it's out there in the world somewhere, and I need to find it, as if it's been written for them rather than them creating it and discovering it from within. Say, what is your perspective on that?
Say it one more time.
Do you believe that our purpose is written for us, and we have to find that one thing that is out there for us to discover what we were made to do, or is our purpose something that we create for ourselves?
So that's the argument of predestination versus free will.
Yeah, could be
No.
construed as that. It's just deep.
So, I mean, if we look at that concept, did God create us to basically be robots? My answer would be no. My answer would be that God created us and has an idea for what an ideal life would be for us. But he gave us free will, or else why would he create us? It doesn't make any sense for him to create more robots. It doesn't, like bunnies. Like, do you think bunnies were meant to run around? No. Now, do you think as creatures, us that have God inside of us, which are the only creatures that have the ability to actually have consciousness of that? My concept on it is that you choose your purpose, but God's been there the entire time. So when I say that, like I've gone through a lot of hardship in my life. My mom died from bone marrow cancer. Do I think that God wanted my mom to die from bone marrow cancer? Absolutely not. Do I think that there's a hurricane that just went through Florida. Do I think that God intentionally wanted that to happen so that someone would learn some lesson? No, absolutely not. Do I think that whenever it came to this podcast today, do I think that God wanted the my camera not to work so that we could jump on this so that I could tell that analogy? No, but I do think that he gives us free will to have a perspective shift or to reframe that into a positive light if we choose to. If we look at what's going on in the Middle East right now, do I think that God wanted people to die is what like good people to die as well as bad people to die in bombings? No, absolutely not. Should we glorify that? Absolutely not. If I look at what's going on in Ukraine, which is a controversial subject as well. Do I think that that was meant to happen for some divine reason? No. Do I think that humans basically orchestrate things for their benefit and that ends up basically clouding and polluting what God created us to do? Yes. And so that's a lot of analogies. But to specify the answer to your question, your life is what you make it.
Mm.
And God has given you free will to make decisions. What you do with that based off of whether you're living in a lens of faith or a lens of fear, which you can only live in one or the other, will depict when you start actually living out your purpose, which is to be your true self, which is not to have a false identity, which is not to allow your ego to control yourself based off of fear and acceptance. You are supposed to be a whole one as a
Mm.
part of a wholeness. And I think your purpose can be whatever you choose it to be based off of what your past experiences are, but it is a choice. It is never going to be forced on you. It is not something that you have to do. It is a choice. And, different levels, different devils. Whenever it comes to you going through life, you get a choice if you want to move into the next level. If we look at transcendence, there's a really good book called A Short History of Everything. And
Mhm.
the gentleman, I forget his name, is one of the best. He talks about life being 11 levels of transcendence, which you referred to earlier. And the biggest thing is like if you want to start living out your purpose, typically you're never going to be one level. Okay. Like you're never going to be one solid level. You're going to be 50% of the level you are, 25% of the level that you can become, and 25% of the level that you left. And the more that you decide to
Mm.
leave whatever your past is behind, whether that be people, circumstances, or identity issues, the more that you leave those, the closer you become to a whole one, which is a choice. So I don't think that we're
Mm.
predestined, but I do think that if God is everywhere and if we live in a collective consciousness, as some people would say, depending on what your religious theory is,
Mm.
that, to choose your purpose and to choose to reframe things in a positive light and a lens of faith is a choice. So, no, I don't think that we're robots that walk around that are controlled and manipulated. But I do think that if you want to, you can live in an alternative universe that is based on nothing but faith. With that being stated, you're going to make mistakes. With that being stated, you're going to get frustrated. Yeah, I
Mm.
live my life very hopeful every day, but if you think there's not times where I get frustrated and throw little tantrums like a little child, that's a falsity. Of course I do. Of course, whenever we were first setting up the podcast today, I was freaking out and in my mind, I'm going, oh, it's not going to look right. It's not going to do. Of course you do, but it's your choice how you reframe those situations and how you move through and build a resilient life to where you can actually see God everywhere and in everything and then align your will with what his will is in your life, which is to live life in a faith-based lens.
Mm. Wow, yeah. There was something I heard from Jim Rohn years ago when he told this little allegory. And he said there's a man who's created this garden. It's really beautiful, kind of like a walled garden, like a paradise, right? And someone comes into the garden and says to the man, "Wow, this is a beautiful garden that you and the good Lord have here." And he said, "What do you mean, me and the good Lord? Before I came here, it was just weeds. It was a mess. It wasn't beautiful at all. It was just garbage. And when I'm gone, the weeds will come back in, right? And
Mm,
and it will get overgrown again, and the beauty will fade away because it will become chaos." And I thought that was a really interesting uh, little narrative because God gives us the tools, the skills, and the resources, the space to make something beautiful, but you can't do it for us, right? We have to do it ourselves. Yeah. Well, I think that's a very hopeful place to finish.
Totally.
And where can people connect with you and find you and find resources and things like that, Adam?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first, dude, school. Both of us are on school. I think it's a great community. I just started my own community here recently. It's
Cool.
just called the Purpose Coaching Institute. You can find it on school. Lots of
Hmm.
free resources, and I'm building a hope-based community on there. It's free to sign up. I'd say the second place is on, any socials. It's just at Adam Asaf Coury. So middle name is ASAFCoury, which I'm sure you can tag in there. And then if you want to find
Cool.
me on
Yep.
Spotify or YouTube, it's just the Backpack Theory podcast.
Hmm.
You can find me on any of those avenues. And I'll tell you what, man, it has just been. How many episodes are you in on your podcast now?
This is number 4.
Dude,
So early
I want
days.
to really thank you because you're an excellent guest, or you're an excellent host. And it's been a pleasure being on here, being a guest. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your guidance. And thank you for your directiveness whenever it comes to guiding this conversation. That is a skill that cannot be taught. And so I really
Mhm.
appreciate it. And I can't wait to see where exactly your podcast and your investment, rising like the phoenix, if you will go whenever it comes to
Sure.
your life. And it has been an absolute honor to be on your podcast.
Well, yeah, pleasure is all mine, Adam. Yeah, it's been great having you on, and you've been an incredible guest as well. And look forward to having you back in the future for sure. I've really enjoyed the
Absolutely.
conversation. All right, man. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.